Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, May 14th, 2025, and today on the Roundup we're going to be answering three questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. And as we do each week on the Roundup, we take our questions that we answer here on Wednesdays from our newsletter that comes out on Mondays. And for those who aren't already subscribed, you can do that a couple different ways. I'm dropping a link into the chat for our newsletter website at smieconsulting.org/subscribe. I'm also going to put in the link to this week's email version of that newsletter, so you'll see what you're going to be getting each week. And this newsletter comes out in email form at about 9 a.m. Eastern Time on Monday morning every week. So if you prefer not to get another email in your inbox, but digest your international ed news from LinkedIn, that option is available as well, and that link is now in the chat to help you get connected that way. So for those who don't know, we recently crossed a very important threshold for the newsletter. It's now getting to 2,500 subscribers every week in either new email or LinkedIn format. So encouraging to see so many of my international ed colleagues here in the US and abroad that are reading this newsletter. And in case you're wondering, the newsletter has two main sections: social media news and international ed news, and that's what SMIE stands for, social media and international ed consulting. So the newsletter, called All the SMIE News Fit to Share, includes a section on social media news, US main headlines, solutions central to what some institutions or organizations are doing to help provide solutions to our challenges we face in international ed, and then a global roundup. That global roundup takes a look at what's happening in other destination markets for international students to see how those countries are dealing with some of the same challenges we are here in the US, and how that kind of perspective can help us in terms of what we do here in the US to help have a better sense of what's in front of us. Now, first question of the day is related to a topic that we talk about often, and it's these global reports that come out, or national level reports that come out that talk about some of the challenges that are being faced. There's two different surveys, two of the actual downloads to links to the actual surveys or reports themselves, one from study portals and NAFSA, the other one from IDP and their DC think tank experience, and then a University World News article by Nathan Greenfield, one of the significant contributors, writers to that publication, on what is happening with regard to this, some of the details he's pulled out of the study portals piece. So let's first go through what the two surveys are, and the question that we're answering now is, what are recent global reports telling us here in the United States regarding the state of international education? Well, the study portals report, done in conjunction with NAFSA and the Oxford Test of English, assessed 240 institutions and their global enrollment trends across the world, across 48 countries, these 240 institutions, so a nice sampling of institutions around the world. It was conducted in between January and March, and the results are just now been released. And I know I filled it out for University of Akron, and I have our own customized report version. Not really that customized, but it does give a little bit how we rank compared to, based on my responses, how we rank compared to other U.S. schools on undergrad, grad enrollments, all of that. So what some of the takeaways from the Study Portals NAFSA survey, along with the Oxford Test of English, was that US, Canada, and Australia saw significant decreases, double digits, in international postgraduate students, so students coming for master's or doctoral study. That fell double digits in the January to March intakes, depending on which country you're in. So Britain, on the other hand, saw an 8% increase in January-February intakes for their programs for postgrads. So that's significant. and postgrad enrollments in the UK account for 1/3 of all their international enrollments. So where at the undergrad level, UK saw no growth, US saw a 1% increase. Canada saw a decrease in undergrads of 33%, so continuing a significant slide. That was 31% decline at the grad level and 33% at the undergrad level. So numbers in Canada are not good these days. We did see an increase in 1% in undergrad. Australia led the way with an increase of 9% in their international undergrad. And that's their January, February, March intakes are their beginning of their academic year. So typically you'll have more coming at that point. So those numbers do reflect that the other big four destinations that have suffered decreases, Canada, US, Australia, UK was the main beneficiary at the postgrad level, Australia being the main beneficiary at the undergrad level. So it is, again, an increasingly competitive global landscape, and that's certainly the takeaway from the study portal's NAFSA Oxford Test of English report, that there are more destinations that students are checking out as a potential landing spot for their higher education. You see this acutely with both India and China, the top two destinations globally. You see them also branching out beyond their traditional big four destinations. And one of the reasons they're able to do that is because they're all seeking, almost all are seeking degrees taught in English and available in other countries for considerably less than perhaps than the cost would be if they went to one of the big four countries. So that's significant, and we've already seen this regional hub trend growing in Southeast Asia, in the Gulf, other places that are trying to become destination markets throughout Europe. We've seen that happening, that they're offering English taught degrees to try and attract more of these globally mobile students who are looking to study outside their countries. And India and China, obviously the largest two main groups, and they are going from not just the big four anymore to something more like somebody coined recently, the Big Ten. Not the Big Ten Conference, which now has 18, 20 members or whatever it is. So we're talking about the Big Ten. The Big Ten instead of the Big Four. So the number of countries that are increasingly becoming major destinations are expanding dramatically. So including about 4 or 5 new ones in Europe with France, Germany, Spain, and I think France, Germany, and Spain are the primary ones, and Finland has just been climbing up the rankings as well. But we're also seeing some players in Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Korea, Japan, also trying to become increasingly hubs for international education. So we see huge growth here, and that's significant. So that's the study portals one. The second report is more domestic. US is focused on the domestic market in the United States, not domestic market, but the U.S. market, and demonstrating the value of international students to the American workforce and innovation. That was the theme, and they could title the conference or the think tank event "Economic Allies." So they brought away these key themes that. Impactful advocacy is at a critical stage, and we've certainly documented that over the last few weeks as many of the Trump administration's new executive orders and decisions related to international education and budget requests have been challenged by unheard of advocacy efforts on behalf of international education and our allies. So that's certainly been coming, and seeing those advocacy efforts realize some fruit is huge. And the lawsuits that have already been decided or will still be pending are the main mechanism for achieving the change that we need to see. So that's the advocacy piece. The second and fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh parts of this, or fifth and sixth parts of this, are making the case for international education by messaging to broader audiences. And this is important as a concurrent tool in our advocacy developed to have our not only are messages that we know are true about the value of international students on our campuses being resonated and sent around our own bubble of international educators, but also going beyond that. We've seen pieces in the Hill recently, a couple different pieces there. We've seen other outlets start publishing Forbes from the business perspective, business and immigration perspective. We've seen other major outlets cover the impact of decreasing international students to the economy. We've seen, again, a wider audience than just our international educators and political leaders needing to hear these messages. So because those other allies and tying what this think tank event is trying to do in DC, or did in DC, is the value of international students to the American workforce and innovation. So there's a clear connection being made here to why international students come and why we should be doing more to keep them, and the value that they present to our economy in terms of their time that they're here as students, but also the jobs that they can be filling, particularly the high-skilled jobs that they could be filling that aren't currently being filled by U.S. citizens or permanent residents. So it highlights the outcomes. This IDP think tank report highlights the outcomes from higher education with workforce needs and how international students are a vital component of that, particularly at the graduate level. So the question of workforce readiness for international talent, challenges, opportunities of employment pathways, those are things that every campus should be grappling with. And if they're not already on the agenda to talk about, it should be. Because how well our career services offices connect our students, international students in particular, with opportunities is going to reflect how well those soon-to-be graduates will be thinking about the preparation they received, not just in the classroom, but the skills that they needed to handle the job search, to handle the interviews and the fairs and the other things that they need to do to become successful and to communicate value. And it's not necessarily all on the student's shoulders. It's on the shoulders of those career services departments to be educating employers that they work with on a regular basis about why international students are an easy win for them if they can hire them for 1 to 3 years, depending on their program, for STEM OPT or regular OPT, and without any cost to the company other than whatever training cost it would be for a new employee, which they're going to have to pay no matter where they're from in the world. So it's also the lessons learned by how other destinations are handling this disconnect that often happens between skill needs in the economy and jobs that aren't being filled domestically with the value of it, what international education can bring to that nation. And I've talked about it here many times and about how it is happening, and this last point is absolutely essential, is that how in other countries, Taiwan, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, at different stages of their developments are becoming destinations, but they're developing pathways for educated international students educated at their higher ed institutions to stay and work, because there's a need that's not being met by domestic graduates. So higher ed is providing a source of skilled labor for a lot of industries in many of these older Western industrialized nations that have had declining birth rates. We talked about that a couple weeks ago here on the Roundup. So it's these are the kind of pieces of evidence that help fill in more of the gaps for most of our international educators about the real value of what we do and how we can be essential components of government policy to improve the standing of the overall economy, not just while they're on our campuses and in our communities, but when they're working around the country. So great report from IDP. Definitely recommend downloading that stakeholder summary to see what their recommendations are, and also how you can pass those along to your leadership on campus to help them get a grip on what is really happening with these main issues on Capitol Hill. What I know many of us have our own state legislatures that are sticking their fingers in what we do in international ed as well, but it's about advocating properly for our students and our industry. So that's a little bit about what those global reports are telling us. Let's move on to question number 2, and that is, will the new DHS policy be found legal? All right, so the new DHS policy, what is it doing exactly? All right, we need to rewind a little bit to fill in the blanks on this, on what's happened since SEVIS was introduced and DHS was formed in the post 9/11 world. We all knew back then, for those of us who were in the industry, that it was a watershed moment in terms of efficiency, supposedly, and ability to change records, to not have to be able to send like documents electronically, and all of these things helped improve our efficiencies in a lot of different ways. It also increased and a lot of older school international student advisors, a lot of PDSOs and DSOs, ROs, AROs, convinced them that they were going to have to be agents of the government. And that was very prescient 22, 23 years ago when SEVIS was first introduced. A lot of people left the profession, had been in a while, saying, I'm not going to become an agent for the government. I don't want to have to be the one reporting that our students are not doing the right things. Nowadays, up until the recent 3 or 4 months ago, the way students' SEVIS records got terminated is when they failed to maintain their status, but in a number of different ways. I'll go through what some of those are. And those eventually had to be reported by the DSO if they didn't register for classes, if they failed to maintain full-time status without reasons, documented reasons for reduced course load, if they didn't update their address, if they didn't do a whole series of different things. So those were always input by the institutions, by the DSOs. And now the new policy, since we've already figured out that the way the government went about their first review of international students is they took national databases, law enforcement databases that basically pulled any international student that was in SEVIS at the time who had an interaction with law enforcement at state, local, national level. And regardless of whether there was a case made, charges filed, or case thrown out, just that fact that they were in that database meant that they were automatically have their SEVIS record terminated. That was clearly found illegal by the courts, and because they didn't have the evidence to show that this was in direct violation of their immigration status. And so those were thrown out. And quickly, there was the big joy, sound of joy or relief that came up from the international community when SEVIS records start getting reinstated, and all the things, the challenges, the mistakes that the government made were being corrected. However, shortly after that happened, DHS leaked a new memo about what their new proposed policy would be. And if you haven't read it yet, ISF Monitor did a great summary of it. And it basically gives, to be honest with you, it formalizes the actual recognition that a student is out of status, which still is going to be done by the institution because they're the ones who have to make the changes in SEVIS to note these potential reasons for termination. That's making it official, which is kind of a non-starter. It doesn't really do anything that this already didn't have done, that the current system didn't already do. It does make one important caveat to this rule that we'll talk about in a minute. But what it says is a terminated record in SEVIS could indicate that the non-immigrant no longer maintains F or M status, and that SCVP can terminate records for a variety of reasons, including but not limited to the following: exceeding unemployment time, and that is something that international students on OPT have a limited number of days that they can be unemployed during their OPT time. There's failure to comply with I-515A. And in case you're wondering what that is, the I-51A is a notice to student or exchange visitor that if they arrive and didn't have all their signed documents, they get an I-515 saying that they have 30 days where they're temporarily admitted to maintain their status, they have to address the requirements of that 515, basically need for evidence to actually get them in status. Failure to repay the 901 fee chargeback. Again, very rare circumstances, whatever that is. The 901 fee, I-901 fee is what students have to pay once they get their I-20 to generate their SEVIS fee receipt, and then that allows them to apply for, and they need that to come back. A chargeback is when a credit card holder disputes a charge that appears on a credit card statement. And that would be if an FM and J student doesn't resolve that to actually make that payment for that SEVIS fee, then they could be terminated. So that makes sense too. So it's nothing that's out of the ordinary. It's a normal reason why they might be terminated. Failure to report while on OPT. Again, that's a documentation requirement, like failure to update their address, that kind of thing. That can be a reason why that they would become terminated if they no-show. That's probably a good thing. And for many of us, no-shows can be an issue if they don't show up when they told us they were going to show up. If they've gotten visas and don't show, then their SEVIS record, their reason for being in the country, would be terminated because they would have not enrolled. If they withdraw from school and don't enroll in a new school, that's a reason for termination. If they violate change of status requirements, if they move from an F to a J or a J to an F or a B to an F, if they don't do what they're supposed to do in that change, then that's a reason to be terminated. If not sure why change of status is approved, why that's on there. That's not really a reason to terminate a record, so that might be just a mistake in the article. Evidence of failure to comply with the terms of non-immigrant status exists. That could be the reporting requirement for addresses and change of major, all these other things. So what happens in those cases, that when these are all reasons why they could normally be terminated anyway, and would be if their institution advisors make them terminated, change their status to terminated in SEVIS itself. So these all happen. When the challenge comes in is that one of the requirements is if Department of State revokes their visa, which is a completely separate process, completely different department, that automatically terminates their SEVIS record. That's new. That has not a cause and effect relationship. There are also, and that is something that we are concerned about in international ed, and that's probably the piece that's going to be challenged most directly, is that in the past, if a visa gets revoked, visas again are only important for students when they are trying to enter the country. And the State Department can revoke visas for whatever reason. Those aren't reviewable cases. So, but if that happens under this new ruling, DHS will say, your record is terminated and initiate removal proceedings. That would basically be Department of State revokes their visa, then DHS will terminate the record and then initiate removal proceedings. So these are the new bases that we're talking about here. So that is failure to comply provision. It's vague, and it does give DHS a little bit more discretion than perhaps we would like, but we're not sure how that's going to get applied and what actually constitutes complying with non-immigrant status, which is only really is delineated in a lot of these changes that they've already enunciated as reasons why they get terminated anyway. So we're not quite sure what that is. Is that the gray area that everybody's worried about? Legal cases will probably seek to narrow the focus of that to these non-immigrant status questions that are rightly within our regulatory now and within the scope of conduct of DHS and SEVP. So we'll see if that actually happens. But it's certainly presenting an interesting challenge. If the tie to the visa piece, if on the reverse side, if a visa gets revoked, it basically eliminates the opportunity for a student who's been in valid status, requires them to initiate deportation proceedings. and basically eliminating any chance for reinstatement. And reinstatement is a regulatory option that currently exists within the CFR. So right now, if this happens, termination of status by if it happens from DHS, that means that then for the other non-failure to comply provisions, does give them, the visa one especially, eliminates the option for reinstatement, which is a legal process that is available to them. So as Stephen Brown, immigration attorney, was interviewed by NBC News, he says, historically, the Department of State has revoked visas for many reasons, but it doesn't impact non-immigrant status in the U.S. And it's just now they're trying to do that part of it as well. So that is going to be the big swing or change if that does get made policy. That can be how many visas are actually revoked each year. It's not a huge amount, but for those students affected, it certainly would be a big deal. So that's it for that second question. Will it be found legal? It's not as is, I doubt, because there are regulatory changes that would need to be made before that could happen. So the last question of the day is Australian international education coming out of this storm whole? And we are covering this one because they've just had elections. Canada just had elections a couple weeks ago. Australia had a weekend or two ago. And now we are seeing kind of the fallout from both countries. The ruling party maintained power, though in Canada they're going to be a minority government there. In Australia they won an overwhelming majority. So slightly different takes on what's happening next. But with Australia, there are some unique factors at play with regard to the international community that don't seem to be aren't really plans to that under the ruling party who won re-election overwhelmingly. There are no plans to really improve the situation. In fact, it's going to get more expensive to apply for a visa, student visa. They already more than doubled it last summer, or last July. For them it's winter, and they're about to add 400 more Australian dollars on top of that, so putting it at about $2,000 to apply, Australian dollars, to apply for a student visa, which we're at 160 and 350 if we throw in the CVIS 901 fee too. So we're at we used to be very expensive, and now we're one of the cheaper options for applying for visa. Cost of education once you're there is a different story, but that for Australia it's going to get more expensive. It's going to their international ed population, much like Canada's, had been kind of half and half, higher ed and vocational study in both Canada and Australia. Australia has seen significant drop-offs in that vocational section, as well as their master's degree, dropping more than a third in both those areas in the last intake. So Australia had been increasing, but they've also seen these new requirements put in place, not only increased visa fees, they've increased the amount of funding that students will need to show to get their visa. They've also seen international students be blamed for the housing crisis in the country, which was a false flag operation, that the international students weren't clearly the ones. They were the victims of it largely, and that universities during the pandemic had sold off a lot of their properties, housing properties for students, apartments and such, just to avoid having to lay off staff. And as a result, they get through the end of the pandemic, and now they have more students coming back, and they don't have the housing for them. So you have students basically pitching a tent in somebody's living room, subletting a place for a living room space to put a tent to live. Lots of other worse situations like that in Canada, but certainly the housing issue was blamed on the international students, which is, again, a false flag. And so there's documentation to show it wasn't them. And the sector really in international education down under now is what the High News artists are calling the sector ambivalent after their landslide victory, because they are going to increase those fees. They're not going to be perhaps as bad as the coalition, Labor and Coalition were going to be, the coalition government under Peter Hutton was promising to be much more stringent, making election promises to vastly increase student visa fees and more than what the ruling party is doing, and to to increase the caps, or reduce the number of students and the caps on who could come in. So, but they seem to be fairly mixed. So they're holding their breath too. They're having some serious damage done by their current ruling party. Canada, same thing. Neither of them are promising any significant changes for the good. So we'll see what happens. But all three of the big three outside of the UK, and as the fourth member of the Big Four, are experiencing some significant trauma. But will that continue? We'll see. We are in a situation in the U.S. Obviously, we've dealt with a lot of bad news in the last 3 months. It certainly looks like it will continue, but with no end in sight. But we're fighting a good fight. We are advocating. We are sharing our stories. We are protecting our students. We're all doing these things to help our students survive and to allow our profession to continue and get stronger eventually. I know many of us are going out to San Diego in a week and a half for the NAFSA conference. Really looking forward to that. We'll talk more about expectations next week for that conference and come to you live from the Expo Floor Hall during that conference itself. So that's all we have for you this week on the Roundup. Thank you for being a part of the conversation again, and we look forward to seeing you on the Roundup in weeks to come. Cheers.